Move on then to chapter 12. I have to say, I really love Revelation. I enjoy teaching it. I enjoy reading it, studying about it. But chapter 12 perhaps is one of my favorite chapters in the entire book. Chapter 21 and 22 are also chapters I really love. But chapter 12 is one that stands up there pretty highly. Let's go ahead and take the time to read it. Let's read verses, if somebody would read verses 1 through 6, 7 through 12, and then 13 through 17. We'll hold off and we'll talk about verse 18 when we talk about chapter 13. So 1 through 6, 7 through 12, and 13 through 17.
Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor, and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven, and threw them into the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
Now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who was called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power of the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short.
And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus.
All right, so we have a little interlude here again between the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls of wrath. And so a lot of people have been trying to, try to figure out, well, how does this relate? Because we went directly from the 7 seals into the 7 trumpets, but now we have these interludes. It's kind of like we're preparing for what's coming. It's almost as if John has to set the stage for us a little bit in order to understand the last part of what's going on. And so we have this brief description of some of the main actors that will be taking their place in the last part of Revelation. But it's also almost like in chapter 12 we have the gospel story condensed, and that it's all kind of jam-packed in a very, very brief amount of time. And it starts off by saying a great portent or a great sign appeared in heaven. Now, the woman that is described here is described as a great sign, in opposition to the other sign of the dragon, right? The dragon isn't a great sign. It's just another sign. Now, I think we could probably say, well, why is this great sign? Well, it could be the significance of what he's seeing, the impact that it made on him personally. But, there's something significant now that is happening. We've been seeing we've been hearing about seals, we've been hearing about trumpets, and now the scene shifts. It's also important to note that the use of the term sign, which is translated in New Revised Standard as portent, is very important for John's Gospel. In John's Gospel, he frequently uses the term sign to refer to miracles or deeds of power that pointed to Jesus' divinity. So although he recognizes other miracles were occurring, he focuses on certain ones and calls them signs to say there's something special about these that pointed to who Jesus was. Would you care to guess how many signs there were in the Gospel of John? There were 7. Right? 7 that he distinctly identifies as signs. Now, that's in the Gospel, right? So this doesn't necessarily point to Jesus' divinity, but it does point us to something important, right? He sees a sign, but it's pointing to something. And essentially what he's pointing to in chapter 12 and chapter 13 is the key conflict of the book. This is what it's all about in a spiritual symbolism. And it starts off by being about a woman. It is a woman who is clothed with the sun. And so the clothing that she has is very radiant, bright. The moon is under her feet, and she wears a crown of 12 stars. Now, these cosmic images we've seen several times in Revelation in different types of fashions. But when you hear or when you read about the sun, the moon, and 12 stars, what do you think about? What is being suggested by saying she's clothed in the sun, she's got the moon under her feet?
Makes me think of Joseph's vision.
Right, so one of the things that's probably meant to draw you back to is Joseph's dreams in the book of Genesis, where the sun, moon, and 11 stars bow down to him. What else would be suggested by saying, like, she's wearing cosmic clothing? If you're wearing the sun, right? Well, okay, yeah, I mean, they're certainly about the size, right? And you're probably hot in it as well. But it's also probably suggestive of power, right? You know, you to be clothed in the sun, to have the moon under your feet, right? You know, these cosmic entities or things that still exhibit a lot of power. And when we think about them, we think of symbols of power. And so there's probably some things connected here with Joseph's dreams, the suggesting of majesty, royalty, authority, perhaps even beauty. But there's also connections here to God to some extent. I'm not saying the woman's God, but if we flip over to Psalm 104 and read, if somebody read verses 1 through 4 of Psalm 104.
Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very good. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. He makes his messengers winds. His ministers a flame of fire.
Right, so, God kind of using all nature as kind of his manifestation, but this idea of being wrapped in light like a garment. Here's a woman clothed in the sun. And so this idea of authority, royalty, majesty, all wrapped up in this woman. Now, wearing a crown of 12 stars probably symbolizes the 12 tribes, may or may not the 12 apostles, probably more likely the 12 tribes. But of course, as we've been talking about 12, the number of perfection and completion, like 7, so that it too is kind of meant to suggest the totality of God's people being taken a look here. The crown that she wears is the Stephanos crown, the crown of success, of victory. Even though she's wearing stars, we might think immediately stars, diadems, but it's the victory crown. Although royalty connected with other aspects of this. What's the condition of this woman? She is pregnant. Not only is she pregnant, she's very pregnant. Right? She is at the point of giving birth pregnant. Right? The contractions have started. So in saying she's pregnant, what could be symbolized here? Well, we could probably say, something's coming, something's about to happen. Perhaps even saying something has been prepared and now the moment has come. But also, of course, what's emphasized here is the birth pangs or the birth pains. They're painful things leading up to the birth. And it kind of brings to mind to me Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. Right? In the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Which, of course, again, it's one of those things where we already kind of know who the Son is, right? The child is. Now, what's interesting here is there are quite a bit of ancient mythologies about a villain who is to be overthrown by an unborn prince who is snatched away before he can be killed by the villain. These myths are found in Greece, in Babylon, in Persia, in Egypt. For example, the goddess Leto was pregnant with Zeus's child, Apollo, the sun god, and the dragon Python tries to kill her because he knows the prophecy that Apollo would kill him. And so she is carried by the winds to an island that Poseidon hides underwater, and 4 days after Apollo is born, he kills Python. Is John seeing this myth or some of these other myths through the lens of the Old Testament? Obviously, there's a lot of Old Testament imagery here, so it's not just a Greek myth or something. Using it as a way to describe what's spiritually happening. There's a way in which there's a spiritual reality behind these signs. Maybe taking something that's known in pagan culture and saying, well, here's what's really going on. Here's what it's really about. Perhaps, but it does seem these parallels are rather interesting. But despite the parallels, we are kind of left with the question of, who is this woman and what is she meant to symbolize? Because quite likely, she is symbolic of something else, just like a large majority of everything else is. And we know, of course, that later on, as we talk about the dragon, it says dragon, but it means Satan. Not that if Satan would come walking through the door, he'd look like a dragon. So who is the woman? What are our options? What do you think are possibilities for who this woman is? All right, so one of the first possibilities that comes out is Mary. All right, the male child is the Messiah, the Christ. So Mary kind of makes sense as she's the one that gave birth to Jesus. What other possibilities can you think of? All right, maybe the nation of Israel, right? The nation of Israel kind of producing the Messiah, right? That the Messiah would be the child of Abraham, right? And God protected the nation of Israel. Other ideas? One that's been suggested has been the church. It's the church because of what will happen later in the chapter, the persecution that she faces. The other two are more, one more would be that it's not necessarily the physical nation of Israel, but the spiritual nation of Israel, the faithful community, right? Not everybody in Israel was faithful to God, and so it's the faithful community. So it could be the nation of Israel, could be the spiritual Israel. And then some people have suggested ultimately it's the plan of God, meaning more abstract and anthropomorphized stuff. And kind of like the faithful community, only that this is God's plan. So we have Mary, physical Israel, spiritual Israel, the church, which spiritual Israel and the church, and there's some overlap there between those three, and then something more abstract like the plan of God. Which of those do you feel is most convincing and why?
I feel like I lean more towards the nation of Israel. Just from the aspect of there's through Israel that the Messiah came, and it's not like the Jews were the least persecuted people.
Right, yeah. Facing a lot of persecution then and now still.
I would read more towards God's plan.
More towards God's plan? And if
Israel being the plan in which God planned to reconcile man back to him.
yeah, there's certainly Israel's part of that, and that maybe it's not specifically about specific people, but more about God bringing this forth. There's a couple reasons why. Well, there's the main reason that I don't think it's Mary is that the details of the latter part of the chapter especially don't kind of seem to fit in very well with what we know about Mary. And then, of course, it's appealing because of who the child is, and who she gives birth to. And certainly, if you're Catholic, it's appealing as well because of the special place Mary holds in Catholicism. And so the royal aspects would certainly be appealing to a Catholic. But I don't necessarily think that it fits well with Mary as how she's presented in the New Testament. I kind of lean towards the notion of the faithful community or spiritual Israel, only because of it's got to be something before and after the birth, because the woman continues after the birth, and so the nation of Israel would be a part of that. But the leading up to, but the physical nation, right, God kind of expands what he means by Israel in the New Testament period. And so that's kind of why I lean more towards this idea of faithful community, which can encompass both physical Israel and then the spiritual Israel aspects of God's plan. But the plan of God itself, I think it's a little bit more than that. But I'd say it's certainly God's plan fits in here as well, right? You can't help but see God's plan in all of this.